Hey, everybody, it's Tim, and thank you for listening to this conversation. We are talking about early 80s drum corps, and this is such a specific thing. I don't actually know exactly how this happened, except that I was having a conversation with somebody about marching drum corps in the early 80s, and we were like, wouldn't it be fun to get a group together? And then here we are, and that person actually couldn't be here. But we're still doing it. I'm Tim Hinton, everybody. Hey, Beast of the Marching Arts, thanks for listening. With us tonight, David Enlow's here. David, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's great to see you. Russ Chandler's here. Russ, how are you?
Great, Tim.
Thanks for being here. Yeah, absolutely. Carl Diefenbach, did I get it right?
You got it right. Great, Tim. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Carl. And then Chuck Henson's with us. Chuck, how are you?
Hi, everybody. I'm good.
So glad that you're here with us. Thank you for being here. So we are going to go back around, everybody, and introduce ourselves further, and especially talk about what we were doing in the early 80s drum corps. But our context tonight is simply to share good memories, stories. How was drum corps different? What do we remember from being back in that time? So let's go back around. David Enlow, tell everybody sort of where you marched, what years, and what you were doing with the corps.
So I marched French Horn Bugle with the Spirit of Atlanta, starting in 1978, marched 79, gap year in 80, marched 81, and then I went to California in 1982 with the Blue Devils.
And aged out with the Devils. Very good. Okay, Russ Chandler, how about you?
Well, I was a rook out, so I marched in 1983 with the Sky Ryders. I marched base 2. It was the only year they did DCI in Miami. It was extremely hot for those of you that were there. So that's about it.
Yeah, I do remember being there. I was on staff with the regiment that year, and it was hot as blazes in Miami. Steamy, shall we say. But not as steamy as Jackson, whatever year that was. But I digress. Was anybody else in Jackson, Mississippi for that? God, that was just brutal. It rained and then it was.
Yep.
Oh my God, I'll never forget that. Okay, Carl, back to you, my friend.
Yeah, I was in the Marine Drum Bugle Corps from 29 Palms, California. And then when I was getting out, I marched with Velvet Knights. So I went from the Marine Drum Bugle Corps to Velvet Knights. So I was in Velvet Knights in 1985. And I keep saying that I'm the very first honorably discharged veteran to ever march in a DCI finals. That may or may not be true.
The keyword there.
That's a very specific notation. Are you suggesting that there are some dishonorably discharged?
I'm just saying there may be some medically guys. I did my full term and then marched. So yeah, there's that.
And that's an interesting conversation we need to get into, because I think that going from the Marines to the Velvet Knights is about as far as you can go. So
it was a fun environment change.
That's amazing. Okay, Chuck, fill us in on yourself.
I was thinking the same thing about the Marines and Velvet Knights, that the difference there. I was a Madison Scout. I marched in the color guard, 81, 82, 83, 84. I taught the Corps 85 and part of 86. I was in the board of directors in the early 2000s, and I've been working with Bands of America forever.
Sure, and everybody recognizes you as the voice of Bands of America, Chuck, and it's always great to hear your voice, and I consider you a wonderful friend at this point in my life. I'm very happy to say that. And of course, you are doing we're going to just have a little quick commercial. You are doing a podcast series for Bands of America's 50th anniversary?
Yeah, the 50th anniversary. Yeah. Can you believe it's been 50 years already? That's crazy. The one that was released today, which I highly recommend everybody listen to, is Bob Buckner. I spend more than an hour talking with Bob Buckner. Now, let me tell you something, Tim. I think we've released 9 or 10 of the 25 I'm doing, and in every single one of them, Bob's name has come up. So it's a good one to listen to. It's called Joining Us, and it's on the Music for All podcast network. You can find that anywhere whatever platform you listen to.
All right, very good. So, and in full disclosure, as we were discussing before we started recording, David Enlow and I were friends all the way back in high school. Mm-hmm. Played French horn together in the county honor band, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't introduce myself too, in case I assume everybody knows. I marched Phantom Regiment, 80, 81, 82. That was the original Spartacus. I always sort of throw that out there because everybody sort of has that as a context for the regiment history. So I always mention that I was very lucky to be a part of those 2 years we did Spartacus back in the 80s. And then I was on staff in 83, and that was super fun. But ending up in Miami, as we've already noted, was not was not super fun.
It
as
was
steamy
dangerous.
as it was. Yeah, it was hot. So some of you guys, all right, so Rush, you were there in 83. Chuck, you were there in 83 with the Scouts too?
Yep.
So do you remember how steamy it was?
I do. I just remember how dangerous it was. I want to say that we had police at our rehearsal facility because there was just a lot of where Madison Scouts were never known for getting the best accommodations, and so wherever we were clearly wasn't a very safe neighborhood. And so we actually, as I recall, now mind you, it's been a long time ago, that there were police around the field where we were rehearsing in Miami. And the rain and the thunderstorms. I live in Florida. You live in Florida. You know what it's like.
Well, yeah, and I was really kind of going for a weather thing. I didn't mean to disparage poor Miami, but it was
hot.
It's all about the neighborhood, and it's all about the steaminess.
Yeah.
Okay. So, David, I'll just jump to you. When you think back on marching drum corps, early 80s, like what's the first stuff that comes into your head?
Oh goodness, I would say having fun playing on the bugles we played on. I think I would love to hear the corps are so talented now. I would love to hear them on those instruments that weren't quite spectacular, but they had that open bore that was just made a huge difference in our sound. No, I think the number of groups and the variety of the performance styles that was extremely evident. And so, you see this group and you know that they're going to always play this, like Phantom's always going to play classical, and Blue Devils and Madison were always playing jazz, and just that little tie that you had in with the personality of the groups. Troopers were always going to do, Americana. So that's what comes to mind when I think of early 80s drum corps.
And I want everybody else to weigh in on that, but I do want to mention that you and I both played on a French horn bugle, which is not a thing anymore.
No, it's both sad, and as a if I were a horn instructor, I'd be really glad to get that crackophone away because they were not easy instruments to maintain, and you had to be pretty accurate on them.
Yeah, because we were playing on those tiny little French horn mouthpieces, which is part of the math of all of that. But I loved that center, that middle voice, that rich middle voice that I feel like is not as evident sometimes these days.
Well, writers used to write for that. And now I think, the mellophone and the large mellophone lines, you're just going to get a brighter kind of voice. And so it's just, I think the way people started arranging that started changing. And so and the other thing was, it was competitive, and the French horn bugle, it was hard to be competitive with that specific bugle. It was just too easy. The partials are right next to each other. So it was very difficult to play.
Yeah, and everybody that thinks that, we are all super impressed with everybody running around these days and all the things that they're doing while they're playing. Well, sometimes, but I think that you're right. The partials, you could literally play like scales, and who knew what note would come out. So it was exciting. I loved that voice, and we used to have in the regiment, we had a French horn section and we had an alto section, which played, I think, a little bit lower. But still were two. And then what I love is when in 1983, the entire middle voice section of the Phantom Regiment was all French horn bugles. 16. They marked 16 French horn bugles. So if you want to hear that, everybody, go pull out Regiment 83 and listen to that fantastic middle voice sound. And it was something really special. So anyway, enough about middle. I know, David, we can't monopolize the conversation and just talk about middle voices. Does anybody else want to talk, though, about the bugles while we're talking about that?
Or the fact that Velvet Knights had 7 different types of bugles?
You mean
I can just remember our low brass guys banging out their bells every time, that they would always drop them on their horns or drop them on the bell. They'd have to hammer them out.
I still have my bugle from Velvet Knights. I don't know how I ended up with it. It's in my office at home. I played baritone. I played upper lead baritone. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that before, but in Velvet Nights that was a thing. And so I had my 2-valve, and I don't even know what it's called now that I think about it. But we had like that horn. We had Dynasty horns, if you guys remember the old Dynasty horns that weighed a ton, and the baritones were kind of out a little bit. We had Canstel horns. We used to get a lot of horns from Canstel. I don't know how Jack, by the way, Hall of Fame member this year, Jack Bevins, did what he did with what he did. He always made sure we had horns, and he always made sure they worked. But they weren't always the same.
Yeah, none of this going out and buying a new set every year just because you can. This was a little more seat of your pants drunk for everybody. There's not as much money, unless you're Santa Clara. But the rest of us were hanging in.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So Chuck, you're not going to say anything about rifles running into bells and causing them to turn. I didn't know if you were going to own that.
I have a really funny running into story. Scott Chandler, who everybody knows from Blue Devils, was a Madison Scout, and he aged out my rookie year. And we did this. Wait.
So you marched in the Guard with Scott Chandler?
Yeah.
Oh my God, and that's like, how noteworthy is that?
and when I tell you this story, you'll understand why we laugh about it all the time. There was a section of the Colas Breakdown Overture we did at the opening there where we literally did an old school headshot. Rifles throw, flags go underneath, and do their thing. One show, went early as the flag person, and I batted Scott Chandler's rifle out of the air. Off it went down the field. Scott Chandler turns to me during a show and says, "Go get it." and I did. Yes, Scott. Sure. Absolutely. I'll be happy to go do that for you. So we still laugh about that to this day. It just was a really, really funny moment where clearly the mistake was mine. But when I think of those years, the overwhelming thing that comes into my head are the friendships and the brothers that I still have to this day. The people that are closest to me in my life right now today, 45 years later, are those people, are the men in the Madison Scouts. They were the best men at my wedding. They're the people I go to when I need something or when I'm having issues. It's the fraternity that we forged during those years is real. And it it's still to this day, there's still a lot of alumni gatherings and things like that. The Corps is doing what the Corps does right now, but the alumni still have real focus on who we are and what how we'd like to stay connected, I think is the best way to put it.
Well, that's certainly the thing I think about first. When I think about drum corps, I think about my friends and the fun I had, mostly at rehearsals, although performances were fun too. But just like, I remember just the fun with my friends, right? Which David Inlet, we were talking about doing that in County Honor Band with French horn sessions, just having fun with our friends. Maybe this is the theme for me in my musical life. But do you guys have the same thing? Like, that's what I remember is how much fun I had, even just being on tour.
It was a blast to go to every rehearsal. I couldn't wait. So doing practice wasn't an issue because I wanted to be there and I wanted to be there with all those people.
I can't say that I loved every rehearsal, but I can say I loved performing. And I love, and how often you get a chance to be in a group of that many people where every single person is at the top of their game all the time. That's the magic of drum corps to me.
I would agree. Like I said, like you've been talking about, the people that I still know, the people that I still go to with issues and problems, and they come to me with theirs and different, are people I've known for over 40 years at this point. And it's amazing. And we're doing a rebirth of the Skywriters, and the whole board of directors, or at least in the beginning, was all alumni, including myself. And, and now we got new people who are getting involved in the activity. And it's just amazing. Like you said, when I think of drum corps, I think of my drum, of course, and the drum line I was in, where you had a great time. But at the same time, the people that I hung out with, I think of more. And the relationships, and like you said, the fun and the stupidity and the pranks and all the different things we did, the bus stories still come to light. And it's funny when you talk about these things in front of other people who have no clue what you're talking about. They're like, what? What are you talking about? But you know, it doesn't matter because those are the best times of your life. They really were.
I can't tell you how many times I've been in a conversation where you talk about all the things that go wrong and oh, we had to push the buses and we had to do this and it was 107 degrees and blah, blah, blah. And then the next thing you say is, you ought to join next year. And they look at you like you're crazy. You're saying, yeah, come on.
Yeah. 27th Lancers are broke down on the side of the road. We have to pick them up on the way to the next show.
Again. Yeah, they were notorious.
Always broke down. Always.
If they ever showed up, it was a miracle. I mean, like bless their hearts. Their buses were famous. Wow.
I'm the same way with everybody.
No air conditioning on those buses. I don't know how they survive with all the luxuries this year or this time.
I also, met some wonderful friends, and especially coming from the Marine Corps, where it is a brotherhood, a total brotherhood. And then I get to Velvet Nights, where, like, even today, two of my closest, well, now it's expanded. My friendship, VK friendship panel has expanded through the years, but being a Velvet Knight is its own thing, right? It's the Corps that everybody wanted to be in, but it was also the Corps that nobody wanted to go to. It was like, they all wanted to be a Velvet Knight, but then they were like, I want to win, so you would get that cross section. I'm one of my closest friends lives in Jersey. He was also, we lived at Jack's house. So, Jack Bevins had a house of kids that came and stayed with him, when we didn't stay in the school gym for move-in. So I literally got out of the Marine Corps on June 6th of 85. I had been going to Velvet Nights camps from like January, I think. And then I moved into Jack's house. And then I did, every days at Jack's house. And then we went on, I literally had nothing but a duffel bag and a sleeping bag. That's what I had. And that was everything that I owned because I had just gotten out of the Marine Corps. And
perhaps a pair of pants.
Well, I was in California. I might not have had a pair of
duffel
pants.
bag.
Oh, okay, wow, I shouldn't have gone there. That's sorry.
Nothing to put in the duffel bag.
It was the Velvet Nights.
Yeah, but I always had plenty of shorts and plenty of flip flops and some red, Converse tennis shoes. So
okay, so we're here. So let's talk about this. Like, this was a culture shock. It had to be like, how did you handle? I mean, listen, we all know the Velvet Knights were so great because they really performed at a high level and they executed really well. And you can't do that kind of show unless you're going to pull that off. But still, what a culture change. Let's talk about that.
I didn't have the best experience in the Marine Drum and Bugle Corps because it was, and not because of, now that I look back on it, it was a bunch of 30-year-olds leading a bunch of 18-year-olds. And in 29 Palms, we had a bunch of California guys in the drum corps. So a lot of Blue Devils, a lot of Santa Clara Vanguard alum. Our drum line was like, we had Kent. I wish I could remember Scott Kent. I think he was like the tenors champion from Blue Devils, and he was in our snare line, or tenor, whatever. But those guys, it was really a brotherhood, and it was the same thing you guys talk about. We got on the, green weenie, and we drove wherever we were going to go. And we did it, there was no air conditioning, and you got off the bus and you go change into your blues, and then you go to the site, but you can't sit down because you're not allowed to have a crease in your uniform at all. And you get off the bus. I remember my very first job in the Marine Corps was playing for a deaf college in Palm Springs. That was my very first gig. And
College for the deaf?
It was a school for the deaf in Palm Springs, California.
Just making sure I heard that.
No, you did. And I remember thinking, I had gotten out of the School of Music and I showed up out there and I'm like, what is going on here? And they were all clapping and having a good old time. Meanwhile, we're playing Pagliacci, like the old Bridgman version of Pagliacci, and I'm getting blown away by how good we were. And, we weren't as big as the 8th and I Drum Corps. I mean, I think we only had 30 horns maybe. At the time, had a decent sized drum line, but we played. I mean, that corps played, and it was good to do that. But it was a lot of rehearsal. It was a lot of, bang, 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 and I was done with that. I was done with that, And so when I went to my first Velvet Nights rehearsal, I'm like, yeah, I got to get out of the Marine Corps. And then, of course, I do Velvet Nights, and I show up to rehearsal, and my first audition was, what do you play? I'm like, well, I play baritone. And they're like, okay, well, here's a baritone. They handed me a baritone, and they said, play some scales. I said, well, what do you want me to play? And they were like, well, play any scale you know. And I said, I know all of them that you can play on a G bugle with 2 valves. Which one do you want me to play? And so I think it was Dave Elder, who was a Madison Scout guy, actually, now that I think about it. Dave was like, just play an F scale. And I said, what octave? He's like, just play an F scale. And so I played like a 3-octave F scale. And he goes, okay, you're on upper lead baritone. And then I got Peter Gunn. I got NBC Chimes Festival into Peter Gunn. And that was my first rehearsal. And I was hooked. Admittedly, before the Marine Corps and in high school, I went to some, I'm from Ohio originally. And I marched in I went to camps for the General Butler Vagabonds, if you guys remember those guys.
Oh, yeah.
Butler, Pennsylvania. And I went to several camps, but then winter came and my dad was like, no, you're not going to Butler. Forget that. You're not driving from, Steubenville, Ohio to Butler, Pennsylvania, which in today's world is nothing. But, but he wouldn't let me do it. And my dad was in the Marine Cadets. So he knew what drum corps was. It wasn't like a big secret from him. But he wouldn't let me do it. And that got me into the Marine side of being a Marine. And, and I always wanted to be a Marine. And then I ended up being in the drum corps. And it wasn't terrible. When I look back on it, I think about I was just an idiot. I should have stayed in. I ended up being in the military for 31 years, just so you guys know. So I went from the Marines to the Army. So swapped over to the Army, did many MOSs, but I was in the Army band in the Army for a long time. And
okay.
Good player. But Velvet Nights was amazing. And, especially when we got on the road, I think that's where my funnest memories are. From the day we left the bingo hall and everybody loaded the bus, me and my buddy Pete Valla, who is still one of my great friends now. He lives in Jersey. We were sitting there, just me and Pete drinking a Mountain Dew, of course. And we're drinking Mountain Dews. And I'm like, all right, what bus are we going to sit on? Because, not like today, it was just, you got to sit on a bus. And in the Velvet Nights, they had a bus called Silver Sides. And apparently that was an invitation only bus. And we found out about that when we were in the parking lot of the bingo hall. And of course, being a former Marine, I wanted to sit on Silver Sides. So I went up and said, and people, you can't sit on here, and I'm like, yeah, move me. And so me and Pete sat on Silver Sides. It was the best bus experience I've ever had. We had the greatest time. I mean, me and Pete we were bus mates, and it was my, and to be honest and open with everybody, it was in my arena and in my life, it was the most eye-opening experience of diversity that I ever have in my life. Coming from the Marine Corps to a diverse element of people in drum corps and pageantry. And I mean every level of it. And some of those friends today that, I met back in those days taught me many lessons in diversity. And I loved it. And it's made me function today as a good human. I hope to think.
Chuck, you nodded when he said that thing about the eye-opening to diversity thing. I think we all had that growing up experience of doing that. Do you want to comment on that, Chuck?
Yeah, because when I went to high school, there were literally 3 black kids in my high school, Boone County, Kentucky, and our drum major, my senior year, beautiful black woman. I forget her name, but when I went, I had an opportunity when Scouts celebrated their 75th anniversary to be one of the keynote speakers at the banquet. And one of the things I said in that was that the Madison Scouts were diverse before diversity was even a thing. When I moved up in 1981, there was every skin tone on the planet. There was gay, there was straight, it was immersing myself into a whole different world. And I think everybody probably has that same experience. And it really causes you to look at I want to say this the right way, because it's a great microcosm of what we all would like the world to be. Everybody working their best. No one cares who anybody is or what they do or who they love. And it really was so refreshing to be a part of something like that. And I know other corps that had real homophobia issues throughout the 80s. And Madison Scouts was not one of them. I can tell you that for a fact. We were like, if you're a member, you're a member, period. You know?
Yeah, I think
I
like
needed music. I knew it.
I mean, I had been to college and I had grown up a lot in college, but I think it was when I was on the road in drum corps that I like really kind of grew up, and I realized all the different types of people there were and all the different ways that they were going to act, and I had to figure out how to deal with that, and it really was important to me. Is anybody else? Russ, you're nodding. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, the thing that I remember most about that, I was in the drum line, so you typically held it. You hung out with your section, right? If you were a drummer, you drum with the drummers. If you're a horn player, typically with the horn line, when you're doing stuff. Except when you got on the bus, our buses were not divided: horn line, drum line, and all that. It was pretty much everybody sat wherever. So I sat next to a flag girl. She and I had great conversations and things. And then behind us, there was she and I weren't tied together. There was a bunch of couples, how that is on the bus. You always have couples. And that was something different because you got to know all these people because you're with them all the time on the bus for hours and hours, and you listen to their conversation. Excuse me. And they listen to your conversations, and sometimes you think what they were talking about was stupid, and then, of course, what you're talking about was stupid, and then what they were talking about was interesting because you're on there so long, right? Because you pick all this stuff up. It's amazing how you become a family because you just start to tolerate all that stuff because you have to, because you're not going to go anywhere else. And it's amazing how at some point you think they're like mad at you. And it's only because they're almost like a brother or a sister. They're like, straighten up or do better or whatever. They became more like a family instead of like your enemy. Like, like today, who knows what you're going to get beside you if you're sitting on a bus or anywhere. But, it was really interesting. Like you said, I really grew up. I really got to know diversity and how to get along with just about anybody, because, in all these corps that we're talking about, you had so many different kind of people come from all kinds of different backgrounds. And, same thing in high school band. I work with high school bands now, same thing. But man, what a classroom to kind of grow up in and kind of get your head straight with what's going on with the world, And like Chuck said, you dealt with all of it and you became part of the family. It didn't matter what they looked like, what they said, they became your family. And that's something that I really hold dear to my years when I did drum corps. So I wouldn't trade for anything.
David,
it's interesting how it's changed from the early 80s and how we dealt with it back in those days, as everybody's just one pool and you go do your thing and here's the gym and you go, it's not like that anymore. I don't know if you guys have been around, current day drum corps. It's a different environment now. All welcoming, all enhancing, still very diverse, but the way it's handled by the administration is so different because of our times now that, it's very, very different. And I think the experience that the kids are getting these days, while I believe are very good, it's totally different than what we experienced back in the 80s.
Yeah, well, we live in different times.
To be honest, the staff treated those kids like crap. We had some instructors like Tom Strachan, who were from Boston, who was so mean all the time, literally made one kid eat dirt on the field. That would never ever happen today. The language and bless his heart. Dave Furness was his last name. He could not hit a spot to save his life. And he was like, pick up that dirt, now eat it. Now you got to get back to your spot. It was horrible. We weren't fed. It was so. It was. I don't know how we survived, but we did so because we loved what we did. And I'm sure you all have the same experience.
David, you have to weigh in, man. You're nodding too much.
It just makes me think of a time when we were on the road and our equipment truck broke down, and so we had no food. And I think we did find someone had an apple tree in their front yard, and we didn't want to be just abusive, 100 people to grab apples. But so we snuck some apples then, but we didn't have food for about 27 hours. And this place, it was in Indiana, and they finally, well, what happened is the truck stopped at night. One person thought, one person was pumping the gas and they thought the other guy was paying. Anyway, they drove off without paying, each thinking the other paid. So they got arrested, and that's where our food was. And I remember the school where we were staying.
Wow.
Put on the band parents decided they were going to put on a potluck supper for us. At that time, the drums, we had our bugles, but the drums were on the equipment truck. And so I remember, and there's pictures of it somewhere, this is in spirit. And, the drums are actually playing the clinic. They had desks around them. And I don't know, you didn't really do a lot of drill. It was elevator drill. But they're playing on these desks and everything for a clinic. And the horns could play. But as soon as they said, okay, the parents have put together a meal for us, and we didn't even let them finish, everybody just started and people kind of passed other people. It didn't matter. You wanted food right then. And I just remember after getting a plate full of food, I have no idea what I got, but I got a plate full. And there was a large contra player who was not as quick as the rest of us, and taking 3 green beans out of this dish and a couple of straws of this. But it's just that kind of thing. I don't know if that happens anymore either. I'd like to think that they are a little bit more organized with how the corps are fed, because sometimes we would get on the bus, they would pass out a sandwich, and the sandwich was 2 pieces of bread and a slice of cheese, and Fred's cola. And that was it. No chips or anything.
Wait, you got Fred's cola? Dang, you guys were rich. Let me tell you a true story. And I said this at the banquet too. We could tell what flavor the Kool-Aid was by the color of the cook's arm. No lie. She would stir it with her arm. Yeah.
Just as you mentioned, the equipment trucks. I don't know if you guys remember this story back in '85, but in Blue Devils. But the Blue Devils equipment truck burned up, and all their percussion equipment got burned up. And we were at a show, and Blue Devils performed their show with Velvet Knights drums, and we were all watching it. And you could tell a difference on how crappy they sounded because they were playing our drums, because they sounded so different. So then you're like, man, Blue Devils really isn't that good. They can't play on our drum. Like, the untrained ear, in 1985 is going, man, they sound like crap. How are they beating our drum line, And, but, that's when that really opened my ears to, wow, drum tuning really is important, the way they did it. They came out and performed their show with Velvet Knights drums that night.
Well, and yay for the Brotherhood of Drum Corps to make that kind of thing happen. Yeah. That's very cool.
When we traveled a lot together, I don't know if you guys remember those days, but if you started out a tour somewhere, you would spend the same time with 3 or 4 corps. We always spent the same time with, on the West Coast tour, it was always Blue Devils and Santa Clara Vanguard, and Marauders, I think, was one of the drum corps, and the Freelancers, and those. And you started traveling out east, and then once you got somewhere, I know we traveled a lot in '85 with Spirit of Atlanta. So once we got kind of in the Midwest, we were with Spirit of Atlanta a lot. So your friend field, I really didn't have a girlfriend in the drum corps, but I had many friends who marched in other drum corps. I was good at meeting other friends, and I it was fun to go, oh man, I can't wait to see Spirit of Atlanta in 3 days, and catch up with my buddy over there or whatever. And I even remember, I think in Allentown, we were right next to Spirit of Atlanta going into, if you guys recall, here's what we could talk about. How about all the fun experiences at Allentown? I don't know about you guys, but we slept overnight in that park in Allentown and practiced there all day, no showers, whatever food we could muster up. Yep. And then, and then performed what? There was prelims and finals back in those days, if you guys remember. And there might have even been a couple days of prelims, like Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday was the show. I don't recall, but there was a lot of drum corps back in those days doing those prelims finals type shows.
We had in 1980, a judge passed away on the field at Allentown while Scouts were on the field.
Oof.
Had a heart attack. And so obviously stop the show, go do that. And then I think they finished the show. I mean, I joined in 81, but that story continued after that. We stayed in that park, right? I mean, like Scott Stewart was like, okay, boys, we're going camping tonight. They didn't have a place for us. But we just pulled the sleeping bags out of the bus, went into the park, found a tree, woke up the next morning. Where are we? Where? I mean, those moments of where are we happen more than I would care to imagine.
Yes.
My Allentown story.
The funniest is we were broken down on the side of the road once. I'm so sorry. We were broken down on the side of the road once, and middle of the night, someone goes, "Where are we?" Some other kid puts his head, looks outside, he goes, Merge, Wisconsin. That's where we are right now.
Nice.
I was going to say my Allentown story. We were pulling up to the stadium. We were late because the buses were having to be pushed up hills and things. And this is in 1981. And I remember as we were passing by, we said, "Who are we on after?" And someone said the Crossmen, and we looked out and the Crossmen were performing.
Oh,
And so we had to run off the buses. We were entering the field, still putting our uniforms on, and we'll just say the performance did not go well. Literally, our warm up was the warm up on the field back when the Corps did, the warm ups. That was our warm up, and we were awful. Freddie was not happy.
And do you think that would happen today? I don't think so. I think they'd move you to later in the show, right? It's the rules are different. I know it just seems like a kinder, gentler DCI than the ones we marched in.
But it was not good at all. And I remember at retreat when we were not pleased with our position. I don't think the Cavaliers were pleased with their position either. And I just remember both corps spelling out things with their gloves on the field. And that, I guess, made us feel better.
Protest.
It was a battle back in the. Honestly, it was a battle back in those days, right? There was always the big battles between, what was it, 27th Lancers and the Crossmen, right? Weren't they always battling with each other? And, you never knew what you were going to. That was the nice thing about being a Velvet Knights, right? We were just friends with everybody. Like we didn't, I remember doing a show in Santa Clara. It was raining out. It was, in fact, might have been in Phantom Regiment territory. It was a Phantom Regiment show. And I remember being there, and we were in a school. It was raining cats and dogs outside. And we're in the school, and Velvet Knights are in the hallway. We're going to do a standstill. The rain's going away. We're going to go do a standstill. And so I remember that we were in a hallway, and maybe I'm getting this mixed up with the year that I taught Velvet Knights, but we were in a hallway, and Santa Clara Vanguard was next to us. And Santa Clara Vanguard, they're all standing, at parade rest, and nobody's looking around, and they're not moving, and their horns are beautiful, and and I'm still starstruck, because it's Santa Clara Vanguard, and I'm like thinking all that stuff. What are we doing? We're trying to make them laugh, and then we get a couple of them to laugh, and what happens? Their visual guys are like, "What are you guys doing?" Blah, blah. They start yelling up and down the hall, "Forget these losers!" Well, all that did was fire up our staff, and then but. Velvet Knights, we didn't care. We're like, yeah, man, you could be idiots like that and stand stupid. We're just going to stand here and have a good time and drink our Gatorade, wait to go on the field. It was a totally different environment, but, I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. And I want to say maybe it was 95 when I taught Velvet Knights, but yeah, it was interesting. But I remember seeing the, Phantom Regiment and this is really what got me involved in wanting to do drum corps. I'm from a little town called Wintersville, Ohio, which is right by Steubenville, Ohio. And our band director was a big drum corps guy. He loved it. So we used to go to Pittsburgh to shows. He'd take the whole class. And we'd go. And I remember Phantom Regiment being there. And his whole thing was, I want you to watch how Phantom Regiment gets off the buses. And like Phantom Regiment got off the buses, and then they went to their equipment truck, and then they went over and they got their horns, and then they got in line, and they were in parade rest, and they didn't go anywhere. Then somebody would get out and clap their hands, and then they march away, and everything was like this, you know. And then, and he was like, that's why we are, because we had a really good band back in those days, you know, and that's why we were what we were. But then I also remember looking at, you know, some other drum corps going, wow, look at these guys, and they're better, you know. Like, you know, they didn't do all that. Why are they better? But, and then I was also that kid that would jump in the audience and scream when I'd hear a soloist from Madison Scouts go off in an audience. I was that kid. I was totally that kid. I'd hear a solo. I mean, when it still gives me goosebumps to this day when I think back on Malagueña done by Madison Scouts. You know, I think about, you know, that kind of thing. When I hear Phantom Regiment play Spartacus, you know, that Spartacus, that I used to have the speakers in my bedroom over my head, and I would turn the volume up and listen to the crackly record, you know, or the 8-track tape of drum corps, and I would hear Spartacus, you know, Blue Devils, you know, whenever I hear La Suerte de los Tontos or Dingy, you know, or anything like that. And, you know, even Sky Ryders, you know, I ripped off a Sky Ryders arrangement for the drum and bugle corps, my very first arrangement ever of Macarena, if you remember that tune.
We did it.
Yeah, totally ripped that off for the Marine drum bugle. I didn't know any better. I was just like, but I had good ear, you know, I had pretty good ear training skills, and I sat there and wrote it up, and they let me do it. I was like 20 years old. But yeah, you know, you think about from the battles of getting out there and fighting for a score, and then the drum corps competitiveness to each other, to just having a good time, man. Just to get out with everybody and meeting all those people from different drum corps, the attitudes that they had, you know, the different, especially drum lines. Drum lines all had their own attitudes, you know, depending on who taught them, who, you know, where they were going, what they were doing. It's all the same. And it's still the same today. Totally today. Absolutely the same today.
I do have a story about our encounter with the Velvet Knights. Actually, I have two. I'll try to make them short. The first one is in the middle of the season. One was the beginning, one's in the middle. Let me start with the middle one real quick. We were in Ankeny, Iowa, of all places, right in the middle of the country, tornado country. Tornado warning came up during the show. We hadn't even performed yet. I think the Velvet Knights had already performed. I can't remember who was on the field at the time, but of course it's one of those get to shelter, so everybody evacuated. Well, our drum line and Velvet Knights ended up in the band room of the school where we were at, right? Because we had drums on, so we had to have a little more extra room than just a horn player that could clutch his horn. We had drums way out here. We were wearing them. So we got in the band room. So, of course, we got in there, and you could hear the rain hitting real hard. Of course, everybody's kind of like, what do we do now? You know, we're not going to have a show anymore. So I can't remember. I'm trying to remember, honestly, this is 1983. I think his name was Matt. I can't remember his first name of the Velvet Knights, who was the head of percussion at the time.
Matt Savage.
That's it. Yeah, Matt Savage was there, and Daniel Moore was our guy. And so they kind of got together, got talking, and we were just kind of shuffling around. Everybody's like, what do we do? So they had us line up in our different respective, we're in the band room, so we had a big space. So we're on one side of the room, they're on the other side. We kind of face each other. It's almost like today's drumline battles, you see, right? So it was pretty cool. We played our exercises that we did. They played their exercises that they did. Then they played their showdown. Then we played our showdown. There was no mallet instruments. This is all battery because they couldn't get anything else in there. And then after a point, we decided just to share. And so we did their exercises with them, and they did ours with them. You know, what a fun time. That's something I will never forget. You know, we just had a great time. And some of those guys I still know on Facebook. I keep up with some of them. Once in a while I hear from Matt. You know, those are the kinds of things that I love. You know, those memories are just impounded right here. You just can't forget them. That's one memory. The other memory was at the beginning, Skyride and the Crossmen. You mentioned being with a corps sometimes for like part of the tour. We were the Crossmen at the very beginning of our tour in 83. We went to California. So they really came. They came all the way across the country. We came from the middle of the country. But we traveled together from Kansas City all the way to the West Coast, and our buses kept breaking down, theirs and then ours and then theirs and then ours. I think they were actually in worse shape But that's neither here nor there. That's just a bus story waiting to be told someday. But we were in a show, I think it was in the San Francisco area, and Velvet Knights were there, and Santa Clara and Blue Devils, the normal California guys, freelancers. We were there. Crossmen were there. Really good show when you think about it. But during retreat is what I'm getting at. You know, that was back in the days, and I don't know how long they did it. The Velvet Knights did the thing where the drum majors sat in chairs and they fanned each other. I don't know how long they did it that year. I can't remember how long they did it. I know they did it multiple years. But at that particular show, it was run by an Oriental group, so there was a ton of Oriental food always at the concession stands. That's about all they had. There was no hot dogs and hamburgers. It was like sushi and anything that you would go to a great Oriental restaurant for, right? And so that's what everybody had. And they have these white containers, you know, those flip containers full of that. And so that's what people would be carrying around to the stands and around the core. People would have them after their performance. Usually all of us would have them. Well, the Velvet Knights guys during retreat, they're two drum majors. They had chairs, right? And they're sitting there doing their thing. When they went out there, and you had troopers too. So you had that guy. He didn't move. What's his name? Garth from Santa Clara. He's pretty infamous. He was there. Didn't move a muscle. And then you had the Blue Devils. They're kind of fun-loving guys. They were okay. And then we had our guy, Victor. But what I remember the most is those two Velvet Knight guys. They had a bunch of those white containers sitting on their little blanket that they had driven out there, right? So they had like enough, like a bunch. And so, of course, they say drum majors front and center. Everybody came up. And everybody's sitting there doing their own thing. And then all of a sudden, everybody's kind of like, what's the white containers for? And then one by one, I don't know who those guys were that year. There was two of them. They would go up to every drum major after they got lined up and take one of those containers, walk up to them, and like, here you go. You couldn't hear what they were saying, but they were trying to give it to them. And everybody took one except Garth, right, from Santa Clara. He just ignored them totally. And what's funny is the funniest moment of the night, at least in my mind, the guy from Blue Devils, there was two of them. One of them stepped forward and he took the thing for him. And he looked down at it, kind of almost like a robot, and then he opened it, and then he looked in it, and then he took his hand, and he goes, "Foonk," right in his mouth, and the crowd just went crazy. You know what I mean? It's just those moments you remember. It was wonderful. Loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it.
It's amazing how memories from that time are seared, you know, into our memories. I can't remember things that I did yesterday, what I said I was going to do 2 days ago. Right? And I don't choose to remember these things, but they were so impactful. And I don't know, it was the time when your brain is more susceptible to just get these things entered into your memories. But it's really amazing how you can remember the showers in Utah in 1979, but I can't remember to take the trash out, today. That's what is so amazing about drum corps to me.
The cockroaches in Mississippi.
There's a video out there. I've probably got it on my Facebook page somewhere, but I think we were in Minnesota and somewhere in the Midwest, and we played "You'll Never Walk Alone" with all the drum corps. Like all the horn lines got up and went around. We all played. So it must have been a Madison show, I guess. And we all played "You'll Never Walk Alone," and then we get done with that, and the audience is going crazy because there's 900 horns out there playing "You'll Never Walk Alone," and they put the horns down, and then the contras picked their horns back up and started playing Peter Gunn, like just out of the blue, started playing Peter Gunn. So then you got this whole horn line playing Peter Gunn. By the time they all figured it out, it was pretty cool moment.
I miss all the corps songs. I miss hearing that. That's one of the special things about retreat. Or, I know they assign corps, and I understand why they do that, so corps can get on the road. But I do miss hearing all the corps songs. That was very special to me.
It's funny you mentioned that, David, because a lot of relationships were built in drum corps with different drum corps by that parking lot experience.
Mm-hmm.
And, some of it still happens, but you're right. If they still did the retreats, I kind of am an old school guy in that way, that if they still did the retreats, the audience loved that. Maybe the corps didn't like it so much, but the audiences did. And the audience loved the retreat. And then when you all get off the field, right, you played a song and you got off the field. It might have been one of your whatever song you played in a show, or you had a song. And then you get off the field, and then everybody went to the parking lot. And it was like a little get-together in the parking lot, usually, where your staff's running around finally going, okay, let's go. Come on, Velvet Knights. Let's go. Wrap it up. Get on the bus.
Honking the horns. And
yeah, particularly Madison Scouts, because I know that our drum corps hung out with Madison Scouts a lot. And Madison Scouts had some fun ways of entertaining themselves in the parking lots that no other drum corps were allowed to do. And I don't know. So I don't know if it was that, but I never ran out of I'll tell you that. I never ran out of.
Well, the drinking age was 18 in Wisconsin, so that wasn't a problem for us.
Yeah. You would always find a cooler of Bud Light somewhere on a Madison Scouts, in a Madison Scouts parking lot. I got in trouble, to be honest with you. Velvet Knights, we
That's
talked
so
about
funny.
how they are, but I had a cooler always with me. It was a little 6-pack cooler, and I always had a 6-pack in it. And I remember I think we might have been in Texas. We just got out of California, and I always went away from the drum corps because I never wanted to get anybody in trouble, and I never wanted. So I always at night would go. I was kind of when I was 21. I thought I could do still whatever I want. I just got out of the Marines, and I wasn't going to just lay down when they told me to go to bed, right? And so I would grab my cooler and I'd take off and I'd kind of go somewhere, kind of hide and drink a couple beers, whatever, or Cokes, whatever I felt the mood for that night. And they caught me one day and they were like, "Let's go, you're out. We're not doing this." And I was really shocked at that. And Jack Bevins was the one that said, "No, we're not going to do this. Just don't drink any more beer. Just stop drinking." And I always thought, well, Jack was always very good to me. And so I respected that. So because, and so I did that. But then I would always go, well, maybe if the staff stops drinking, I'll stop drinking. I'm 21, I can drink, but I did. I didn't do it because they asked me not, Jack asked me not to, and so that's when I did it. But it's a totally different environment even today. I mean, you couldn't, it's just so different, in a better way for sure, in my opinion.
Well, one of the things I'd like to point out is it's different, but it's not different. And I try to remind people of this all the time. I have friends who lament how different the shows are and what they look like, what they're wearing and all this stuff. And I say, okay, but if you drive up to a drum corps on the road, they're in the morning, they're still schlepping suitcases and they're sitting on the curb having a bowl of cereal, and there's still the food truck trying to, and so like that always makes me feel good. Because I'm like, okay, these kids are still having the same great core experience I had. The shows may be really different, and the way they're presented may be different, and all that. But being on the road with the drum corps, they're still getting that sort of amazing life experience that changed us all and sort of set us up for success. So many things that
But
have
you know what,
served me
Tim?
well.
They don't get to have it for the length of time that we got to have it. There were 2 tours when we marched. There's only one now. They pay a gazillion dollars for the summer. I don't know how any parent says, sure, I'll give you $3,000 for a summer, sort of thing. Our dues in the Madison Scouts were $350, and they went down $50 every year you stuck around. So there were a lot of those old timers that were marching for nothing. No wonder you were talking about your cooler with the beers or Cokes in it. My little cooler had peanut butter jelly and a loaf of bread in it because that's what I was, to make sure that I was going to be able to eat something.
Well, it was a different time, and the tours weren't leave and be gone all summer. There were like 2 times where you were on the road for a certain amount of time. I lived with a family in Rockford, when I was there rehearsing in the evenings with the regiment. So it was a different kind of activity in the way it was set up. I do think that there's a podcast everybody can find at the Marching Roundtable that talks about the expenses of drum corps and why it's worth the amount that they're paying and why it costs what it does and all those things. So you can check that out. And I do think it makes a good case for the value that the students are getting for the level of instruction and experience that they're having. But no doubt, Chuck, if you think back on the 80s, what we paid and what they're paying and the experience and all, very, very different stuff all around. But
I mean, they have
want
HR
to make
people on staff now.
right. But I want to make the point that I do think that they're still getting a drum corps experience. It's
Of
a
course.
different kind of show,
Yeah, of course.
but that feels good to me to know that they're still having that sort of, I'm going to grow up. I mean, that's where I felt like I grew up.
Well, it's the pursuit of excellence that we all fell in love with, I believe. And they're doing the exact same thing. I mean, the performance level of the corps now are just ridiculous. Playing things and doing things visually that I think we all would have done it if we were asked to do it, because that's what we were into. But what they play now and how well they play and how schooled each of the lines seem, they're fantastic. About the expense thing, I like to tell people, well, if you went on a 2-week cruise in the Mediterranean, it would probably cost you about the same as it costs doing a summer of drum corps. So if you're looking at it that way, that's while the cruise might be kind of bougie and your experience in the corps might not be bougie, it really is a great value for what you're getting, because you're not just getting instruction, you are getting lifelong lessons, whether you realize it or not.
And how about the kids? You know, it's fun to have been a kid in a drum corps and then teaching the kids in the drum corps. And then even today, teaching the kids that I run, these are just great kids. I mean, you know, walk through a parking lot and just say hello. Just be the guy that say hello. And they will all say hello back. They'll all say hi. They'll all smile. They all help each other out. It's fun to watch them go. There was a couple experiences this summer with troopers, and they're all thanking each other. They're all helping each other. They're just great kids, man. Like and I feel like because of the family orientation that we got in drum corps, it just made us great people to be around. I mean, let's face it, all 5 of us are great people to be around. So. But in all seriousness, I mean, they're just great kids. I mean, all of them are.
Well, right. And I say this to people all the time, if you're worried about the future of the world and lamenting how things are going, all you have to do is go to a band practice or go to a drum corps rehearsal and meet those kids. And you're like, okay, I think we're going to be okay. Because that kid over there is a great kid. He's working hard. He's learning how to get along, how to make things happen, how to create excellence in his own life. That's what served us all so well. We need to start wrapping this up. I hate to say, so I'm going to go around and let you each say one more thing. If you want to repeat something that you said, or one last memory, or anything like that, Chuck, I'll just let you go first randomly. What would you like to say in wrapping this up? Thinking of drum.
I've got bookend memories. 1981, Montreal. We had come into that show expected to win. We had won Ogdensburg, New York, which was the year before. Our horn line decided they didn't know what to do with the 55-yard line, and we just fell flat on our face. And Santa Clara won the show. And there's a young lady, her name was Erin Fletcher, that I still keep in touch with today in Santa Clara Vanguard, when they did Young Person's Guide, and they had those scepters that we call bedposts. And Erin Fletcher traded her bedpost for my rifle in 1981. Wow. And I had that bedpost for decades and decades. And one of my dearest friends on the planet, Kathy Carlson, who's from Madison, she marched State Street Review. She ends up going out the Blue Devils. And when the season end came and we're all out there for retreat, we had made a pact that whoever placed higher than the other, that when we trooped past, that we would break ranks and hug it out. And that's exactly what we did. So I think Blue Devils were second and we were fifth. And so they announced fifth. We pull out. We're playing our tune. We're going by Blue Devils. And I'm looking at her. I'm like, are we going to do it? Are we going to do it? And the next thing I know, we're running toward each other across the field and gave each other the biggest hug on the planet. And to this day, the rush of that moment and the sounds of coming from the crowd in the other chorus will live with me forever.
Wow, good story, Chuck. Carl, how about you? Final thoughts.
I mean, this is great to talk about and bring up old memories. I was really amazed at how impressionable we all talk about our directors and band directors in high school and stuff like that. Jack Bevins really had a big influence on me in drum corps, because he was my first drum corps real director that, I remember. And he was so caring with all the members. All he cared about was getting that corps on the road and doing the best. And he was really a big influence on me through the years. It was fun that we kept in touch. I don't know how that happened, that we were able to stay in touch all the way through 1985 to even this last at DCI when I was sitting in his Hall of Fame induction, dinner, and and just all those, just what a great guy that he is, and I'll never forget. He said it at his speech, which kind of made me laugh. But Jack's favorite line was, "All right, stop the bullshit," and then his speech for his Hall of Fame thing was, "All right, cut the bullshit," and that was really all he had to say, and he was done. But it was good to see him get recognized, being somebody, I think the Hall of Fame is a big deal to me. It's a big deal. But then also the other thing is just how it influenced me to stay in the activity from 1985 until, I'll be teaching troopers again this year. So, and still doing drum corps. And, and I've done everything from judging to, teaching senior all age corps and still doing a little bit of everything. And it's that influence of drum corps that I got in 1985 by the Elder Brothers and by Greg Wool and by, Matt Savage, watching him work the drum line and watching people teach us. Deneen, we had a little girl named Deneen. She was our baritone tech. She probably doesn't remember me from a hole in the wall right now, but I remember she had an impact on me, because, she switched my mouthpiece to a different mouthpiece and it made me sound better. You don't think about that stuff so much. And it was just amazing. I think that's important. I hope the kids are still getting those same types of experiences today.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Carl. How about you, Russ? Final thoughts?
I'm going to hate to say this, I'm going to make a shameless plug. Since I was a Skyryders disappeared for 34 years off the field. 1993 was the last year they did anything. And this year we came back in 2025. We had a mini tour. Everybody on the board, except for a few, are alumni. And so I'm back with people that I marched with, which is really cool. And you mentioned seeing kids eat a bowl of cereal. I experienced all that. We did our mini tour. I was part of the tour. At 62, it's not easy to live that tour like I did back when I was 20. But I tell you what, I had a hell of a time. It was fun. It was challenging. It was hard because I do have health issues. But you know what? I would never ever go back and not do it. But Skyryders are back, and I couldn't be more proud of the fact that we brought back a corps that was popular in the past. Hopefully we'll do more. Again, shameless plug here, guys. And don't mean to talk about the future, but the future's coming. So very happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this and you want to help them out, send them a donation to the Skyryders. Look them up and support that because they're giving kids a great experience. Again, and Russ, congratulations on that. I love that you and Carl are both really still involved in teaching, and that's wonderful. Yes. David, man, my friend from high school, it's so fun to reconnect with you. What would you like to say?
Well, I, just the end of my drum corps career, being in or marching in 82 Devils, and I just remember the weather in Montreal that year. It was probably in the 40s, and we had so many people coming out to watch the corps rehearse. That was one of the largest crowds ever for DCI. I remember, I think we followed Phantom that night, and hearing the crowd just erupt. And we're thinking, gosh, we have to go on after that. And I remember how they brought us on the field. There was a big old wall, and you walk around that wall and you just, see so many. I think it was around 40,000, might be including all the participants also. But just that experience. And I think for me, being in Jim Ott's horn line and spirit, and being able to capture the Jim Ott Award that last year was very special. And I just remember the last minute of the show when I remember thinking, is this it? Is it really over right here? I just couldn't believe it was happening, but it's still, once again, just burned into my memory in a very positive way.
It's wonderful that we all have these experiences, and it's been fun to reconnect tonight and sort of go back to memory lane. Remember, I think obviously anybody that's listened to this will notice that we all talked about how it changed our lives, made us better people, and think back so fondly on it. And the thing I want to remind you is this is still happening to students who are out there marching, and support Drum Corps. Go to a show, send a donation, buy a t-shirt, whatever. Let's help keep it going, because students are still having great experiences. It's a little different than it might have been back in the early 80s, but it's still a great time. So David, Russ, Carl, Chuck, thank you for talking and having this fun conversation tonight. This was really fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Tim.
Thanks for having us,
Thanks
Tim.
a lot. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.